lovely to be here with Prayaag and Amrita, both of whom I know very well and had the most wonderful time reading their books. Interestingly, our session is called Modern Lives. And I think one of the core ideas of modern in the contemporary world is the use of technology and how technology in a way is sort of, it brings out two selves or multiple selves in the way in which we organize our lives virtually as well as in the analog world, as they call it. So I think first and that is something that connects both Mother India and the other sister, which is Prayag and Amrita's books. And I think we can start with a little bit. I would like Prayag first and then Amrita to introduce and maybe read a little bit about, and talk about your books and read a section maybe. And also talk about what it is to be modern in the way in which that we are, our present lives. I think that would be a starting point.
Hi, thanks a lot for that lovely introduction. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay, and thank you all for coming. It's really a great turnout. Did you want me to start by reading? Or?
No, start by what it is that is so deeply modern in your text and how that sort of is also undermined by, I know your characters. For people who have not read, I mean, it's about this character, Mayank. And I won't say anymore. I think Prayag should say. And it starts with Mayank in a room. Yeah.
So my story is it's a very contemporary story. It's about a young man who lives in a part of Delhi called Mahipalpur. He uses a photograph that he finds on the internet, on social media. He uses a girl's photograph to create a meme of Mother India. That's why the book is called Mother India. He works for a YouTuber, and so he creates this video / meme kind of thing that goes out, that then goes viral. And he uses this girl's face without her permission. And so the story is actually starts from then. It's about how it spirals, both their lives spiral out of control in some ways. So I mean, it is a very contemporary story. It's a very modern story. I suppose that's why this session is called Modern Lives. It was interesting to me because Mayank, though he lives in this, he spends so much time in this digital world and things like that. When I was writing him as a character and trying to build a sense of empathy for him and trying to build a sense of who he was, I found that I had to go all the time to his analog life or his offline life, to try and identify him as a person. Try and think of him as a fully rounded person and not just a character that I was using as to convey certain ideas or certain understandings of or certain feelings about where society is today. So it's interesting because all of us, we spend so much time online, but in many ways what roots us to reality and to existence is our offline lives. So there is, I think that's also a part of modernity. We tend to think of social media as modernity or something like that, but we are basically the same people, and it's just it's just a kind of another distraction that we've added to our lives in some ways.
Let me just, before you read, actually, let me just add Amrita to this discussion, which is that, and one thing I also want to say here that you mentioned Mahipalpur. For people who you don't know, it's an area in Delhi, and it's also a place which is like an urban village. So while we are talking about modern and the city, you also have urban villages in the same city, which looks at the dichotomy of class in a city like Delhi, particularly in a city like Delhi. And I think that's where I sort of get in Amrita as well, because her character Maya. So there's a lot of intergenerationality in your book. So there's modern and there's also two generations who are trying to understand what it is to be modern, right? So, that's something you would like to
Yes.
add.
Thank you. And again, to echo Prayag, it's lovely to see so many of you here, analog in real life with us. I think for me, the story really started with my main character, Maya, deciding to perform. She sort of decided that she wants to go offline, and she had to post about this on social media, because I've realized increasingly none of us do anything without capturing it, sharing it, and it's become such an important part of how we live. I was interested in looking at how we not just perform on social media, but how we've started curating our personalities, our lives, our personas. And increasingly, I find people, do want to, and I'm not pointing any fingers here, I do this as much as anyone, sometimes we're just tired of thinking. Something happens and you go online to be like, oh, I wonder what my opinion should be on this. You know, we've started outsourcing outrage. We've started outsourcing a lot of what we think, to this sort of influencer of choice. And for me, I think that's really what's interesting is that, in a country like India, and certainly to speak to my story as well, where there are echoes of, Mother India of Prayag's book, I realized that for a lot of us, we are actually all living this amalgamation of like contradictions, where we want to be modern, very high tech. We're performing on social media. Some of us are struggling with our own internal lives, looking to spirituality, not wanting to share that. As someone said to me who'd read the book, was like, oh, because it's so cringe. Like, I don't want my friends to know I go to, there's an ashram and there's some fraud godmen in this, I'll warn you, I'll warn readers.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be, we keep talking about wanting to be authentic, but we don't actually want to be authentic to the point of being vulnerable. So for me, what's interesting about this group of friends, when this girl decides to, ghost them, basically, is how frantic they get. And initially, what's changed for all of us, especially for those of us who are older in this audience, is that we remember growing up in a time when something's happening to a friend or family member, you pick up the phone, you call, or you'd go over to their house to see what's going on. What's happening now is when even if something's happening, you check to see what are they posting, what's happening.
When was the last time they were online, right?
And this also happens with our friends. They're like, oh, they start judging, like, oh, she's back online, she must be okay. And who knows what, trauma that
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. In fact, that's one of the things that is actually common about both the books, which is appearances and disappearances. Yours is like somebody disappears from online world, and she appears first in the online world with an image, right? The appearance of the face of the photo in the online world. So I think that's something which is very interesting, that we also always talked about appearances and disappearances in terms of the analog world, the physical world, but here there's an entire separate dynamics which goes on in front of our phones and, like the crux of our modern lives, I think. So I think, Prayag, why don't you read a segment from, to sort of give us a sense of that.
I saved a little section that I wanted to read from. So Mayank has been sort of tasked by his boss to create this meme, and so he's sitting at home. He's gone home. It's very late at night. I did a bit of research on how a fledgling YouTube creator would work, and the deadlines are crazy. You're pumping out content every day almost, and there's a lot of pressure to just keep constantly post stuff, and Mayank is caught in that cycle, and so he's working on this meme. He's trying to do this. He's trying to create this this video, and I'll just start reading.
Mayank is the central character, so essentially you are with him, and very empathetically, written about also, despite who he is and what he does.
Yeah, thank you, thanks a lot. Yeah, he's this right-wing guy. That's not really my politics.
He's a troll, I would say, right?
So I've tried to write about him. Tried to think of him as not just a troll.
Yeah.
So, but I'm actually going to read a section where he's behaving quite like a troll. But sorry. She should be under attack, Vikram Sir had specified. Mayank read the 2-paragraph brief once again. He had already inserted the drawings of 2 young boys in ratty kurta pajamas on either side of the mother's legs. The boys' right arms were bent at the elbow and raised over their heads. He placed white prayer caps on both their heads and rocks in their right hands. Now to animate them hurling these rocks at the body of the motherland. At first, the rocks flew low, at the mother's sari-clad knees, the Deccan Plateau. More rocks towards the Gangetic Plain torso, and still more of these makeshift missiles landing on the gentle face over Kashmir. Mayank worked hard now, finessing the pleats of the sari, adding cartoonish flourishes to the blood that spurted each time a rock landed on the motherland's body. Once he was done, he evaluated the 4-second clip, and despite himself, as he watched, Mayank's chest began to tighten. His breath felt shorter. These 2 Muslim boys, throwing rocks like they did at our soldiers in Kashmir, against brave policemen when Babarpur and Gokulpuri went up in flames, daring to raise their hand and voice against country, against mother, against all our mothers. The clip looped and the blood spurted and the rocks struck her legs and chest and arms just as they crashed upon the plateaus and mountains and rivers, the thighs and heart and angelic feet. He added an inspired flourish, a tiny flinch from Bharat Mata as a rock crashed into her cheek. It was 1 a.m. Mayank stood and stretched. Some minutes ago, while he'd been finishing a delicate color adjustment, there had been shouting out on the street. Mayank went to the window to investigate, looking down on a tile shop that men sometimes gathered outside at night once the shutters were down. 4 or 5 scrawny men drinking Bhojpuri film music, construction labor, migrants. He stared blankly out of the window, aware, dimly, of a small irritation to his calm that he could not place. Two of the laborers commenced a kind of crouching dance, tumbling over and then springing back to their squat. Mayank picked up his phone and began to film them idly. You never know when you'll end up with viral gold. But the burst of alcoholic energy seemed to dissipate as soon as he started recording. There was a round of quiet laughter before the duo collapsed to the pavement. Mayank was still gawking absently at the street when he remembered the bones.
Thank you. Thank you, Prayaag.
Thank you.
In fact, one of the things I remember about Prayag's book is description is like the feeling of the dimness is a constant trope in your book. You know, like it's almost as if it's like, you know, there's a dimness in one of the darkness of the character, and it's something which is being reflected in the dim light of technology, and you know, it's something which I kept thinking about. I think.
Thank you. That's really well observed. I mean, I think what you try and do is you try and capture some of the interiority of the character in the external world, and you can't have, if he is going through something, you can't suddenly place him in a completely different context. I don't know if you feel the same way. It kind of reinforces that.
And I also love that, I mean, with Mayank, you find, and you'll be surprised after hearing that passage, but by the end of the book, you actually find yourself empathizing with him. The kind of, the binaries he's drawn and how he's trying to like just keep his job, and that he finally finds that moment where he feels they've crossed the line. But I also want to, I mean, it makes you realize also, I think, Prayaag, how much more conscious we need to be on what we're clicking on. Like these images are going viral, and that outrage is being fueled because it's part of this bigger process. And he's able to distance himself from what's happening, but keeps getting riled up by his own image from that passage you just read. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it does.
Mike, Prayaag.
You do feel a kind of visceral reaction, that when you see something online and you kind of, you react to it, and it's a bodily reaction, and I was trying to capture that.
Because you can't touch it. It's almost as if you can't touch it, right? There's always a distance. And in fact, actually from there, I have to get to Amrita's, because we talked about Bharat Mata, and we come to a different kind of a mother who abandons. And I want to also note this, that not very few novels talk about an absent mother. They don't talk about errant mothers. It's almost as if they don't exist. It's almost as if there's only one image when we must subscribe to, and Amrita does that beautifully. So please, I mean, read, but talk about this first.
I like the prompts that are coming. Focus on this. Thank you. So my main character, Maya, who's a protagonist I was talking about, who decides to ghost her friends and perform it on social media, has this very traumatic backstory that her friends are kind of sick of hearing, because they're like, oh my God, all that childhood drama, like how much will you keep letting that affect you? But she essentially is abandoned as a child. She's adopted into a new family. And I think one of the things that was interesting about writing, for those of you who are writers or aspiring writers, one of the things that's interesting about writing this book is, in my first of probably 12 drafts over 9 to 10 years, I don't want to get into the pain and agony of that, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, a lot changed for the story. But one of the things that I started with was the mother was very much the bad guy. Like if there was a villain in my book, it was the mother. How could she abandon this child? And
but she's
that
not
changes.
In the end. No.
She's not in the end. And I had to rewrite that draft because you actually realize, I think, that women, especially the generation above us, I feel like a lot of their choices were so prescribed, as you said. There was no option of, I think there was no real concept of postpartum depression. We already have a great vocabulary nowadays to understand what people might be going through. And I think less and less stigma by the day, by the year. But there were certain categories you were put in. You had to be a good wife. You had to be a good mother. There's a bit that's inspired by real life, I will say, where she hears that there's a friend whose parents are marrying the girl off as she's finishing her exams, and she doesn't even know. And this is a reality many of our mothers would have gone through in India, even as they were struggling to modernize. Like the 70s, actually, the rest of the world was doing like flower power, and our parents were dealing with very different,
completely different
things.
reality.
So Maya, I think, also learns to empathize. I think the mother comes in much later as a more fully fledged character, and then there are some, parallels between them. I'll just read a short bit from the beginning, and hopefully give you a flavor of what's happening. So chapter 1 is, It's Not You, It's Me.
I like this title. It's a lovely title of a subheading. It's not you, it's not me. It could be like anyone, I think.
I feel like we might have used this. Life is short. Before you know it, time's up. Maya posts on her page, unable to resist the urge to perform the way social media loves and insists on. 22 likes, and 4 days later, she disappears, ghosting her friends and a new potential significant other. None of them knows that she's already on a timeout, not till she announced it, but that just goes to show how much attention they were paying in real life. Maya's previous cryptic status update, "My best friend has left the building," by now has 55 likes, most from people assuming this is some cool reference they're not aware of. So a like to keep up, but not enough interest to probe further. She did get some individualized attention, the update having prompted 10 inquiries, 7 of which were on the site itself. A couple of people WhatsApp Maya, and only one person thinks that post refers to her and is faintly annoyed at the implication. But Akira is that kind of girl. As people used to say when status updates were the norm, it's complicated. The thing is, Maya is going offline in no small part to avoid her self-professed BFFs and the BS that passes for everyday social life in this great capital. None of them get it, she thinks. None of them ever will, she has known, ever since the trauma that hit in high school. She herself, though, lost in a world of her own making, doesn't even realize that she's been looking for an exit, an escape, until she suddenly does. One person does the old-fashioned thing and calls her on the phone, possibly because he's related to her, and probably because he knows that family ties need to be reinforced periodically away from the virtual world we all prefer. In an unusual, dysfunctional family, there are no winners, but we aren't all losers either. And Maya's brother knows, has always known, that showing up is half the battle won. Thank you.
Wow, lovely. Yeah. So, one of the things you notice is the sarcastic. Yeah, sorry.
I
Go
have a
on.
question for
Yeah.
Amrita. That's what I just wanted to ask. So, because both of our books deal with social media and they're about this world, did you feel when you were writing it an awareness of, because your book also, her book starts in this very thrilling kind of moment, but it's like straight into a roller coaster. You're already in this crazy ride. You start, and so did you feel an awareness of the social media world and how we're competing with all this different kind of media, and to keep readers engaged right from the outside? They both have this kind of thing. I felt, which is the pace is very fast of both novels. Did you think that when you were writing it?
I don't think when I was writing it, but definitely during the edits and some of that, it does come across. But I also think increasingly that's how we live our lives. My big disclaimer, by the way, guys, is that I worked at Twitter for 5.5 years, so I have a lot to answer for on
forgot about
another.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it gives you a ringside view of how adrenaline and cortisol addicted we can get, right? Because at one point we were performing our lives, as I said, on social media, whether it was Twitter, increasingly Instagram and other platforms. But everything is quick. And I think, even for the characters, as they go through the story, you realize that there's no, and to what you said earlier, there's no nuance or context. I'm going to get outraged just listening to that description you read. It's going to go up as a reel. Everyone's going to get mad at us. No one's going to think through, what that context is. So it's definitely something that plays on your mind.
Also because both of your books have a very dramatic opening, and the drama is played elsewhere. It's in another, in front of a gadget, and you also make, it's a new form of dramaturgy actually. And Prayaag has told me not to be academic. I cannot help it. I'm sorry. I already did not ask one question. This is it. So, but there is a dramaturgy which you're experimenting with. You do realize, which is that, it's not just a physical accident or a physical death, which is usually a very interesting opening and which gives you a sense of an entire scenario of fiction. But you're actually doing it in a completely new way. Both of you are doing it with your novels, whether you realize it or not, in the virtual world. How did you come to that? Did it come naturally to you? Did you think about it?
I knew how I actually wanted the characters to kind of encounter each other. So I've talked a lot about Mayank, but there are two principal characters of the book.
Kashyap and Nisha.
No, Nisha is it's told in two voices. They alternate chapters. They sort of alternate narrations. And so Nisha is a girl who works at a mall in Delhi called Imperium. She works at a chocolate store, like a high-end chocolatier. And so, for me, that was also, a theater that's increasingly important in Indian society. The mall, that space, that it's a kind of, a capitalist dream or nightmare, whichever you want to think of it. And so it has this, that it has a kind of veneer of something very fancy, but underneath. So I wanted to write about someone who works in one of these malls. And so at first I had them actually physically meeting, and then the pandemic came, and then like
That's
the sort of social
interesting.
media became such an important part of our lives during that time. Not that I wasn't on social media before, but it seemed to increase in volume, if I can use that term. Like it suddenly, all our communication was through social media, and we were talking to our friends on social media, and it just occurred to me that nowadays it's much more likely that he sees a photograph of this girl online than me seeing her at a metro or something like that, which would have
Absolutely,
been
yeah,
much
yeah.
more kind of
Yeah.
and I didn't even realize that I was writing about a guy stalking a girl until I actually wrote it, and then I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of
Yeah.
sus, as they say.
Yeah, stalking, which is
Very Delhi, very
Oh,
sus.
all of us. There's also like Nisha comes from the hills. That's something that is something you must talk about, because there's a dichotomy between a hill, coming from that kind of a setup and where she's working. In fact,
Yeah, I mean, again, she's a migrant to Delhi, which is a
yeah.
very, I think we all, if anyone's familiar with the cities of India now, there are so many people from all over coming from various parts of the country. And, I wanted to capture that PG life and, being away from your family and trying to make your own way, like, and not being dependent on other people and not being dependent on your parents. I think it's a new form of, feminine experience or female experience. At least we were graduating from college and things like that, it was hard to imagine a girl just going away and like living by themselves completely. Like there was so much pressure to stay at home and like like all of that, and people did it, of course. I'm not saying people didn't do it, but it seems very common now, and so I
Yeah.
wanted to try and write about
Yeah.
that.
Amrita, going away is also a part of
Yes.
your story. I mean,
Yeah.
awakening, going away,
Yeah.
particularly the family setup, because you deal with grief and loss in a beautiful way. So that's something
thank
you
you.
must mention here.
Yes, it sounds heavy, but I promise you, there's.
It's not. It's very, very
not.
breezy, and it's very like
Yeah,
nicely.
it's a weird thing to say about grief and loss,
Yeah.
but it's part of life, and I think
Yeah.
it's something that came out as a theme in my book. But just to your question of social media, for me, in this book, that first scene of her performing her absence is what kicked off this book for me. And I think there were so many iterations and changes, as Uday knows, who's sitting here, read one of my early drafts, and a lot of I think somebody told me later that it's so clear now that this is a post-pandemic novel. The underlying theme of it, and like yours.
Both of your
Yeah,
work actually.
yeah.
The post-pandemic is a new genre. I would
Exactly. And I think it did have to change the story. But from the beginning, I knew that this is how the opening scene is. The opening scene came to me. Maya's opening scene came to me. And I feel like, I didn't realize, but I have shared a little bit, and I'm not going to, get into all of the drama of it. But the year I was sort of working on this draft and kind of like getting edits or getting people to read it was also the year I lost my father. And it's been, it's 8 years now. And it's something that you don't really have the vocabulary to deal with when it's happening. And I think it's something as more of us get to these life stages, you realize that your friends and family don't always know what to say, how to be. You don't know how to be around people. Everyone gets a bit awkward. And the repercussions I felt for a long time. It's one of the things that makes people feel very alone. So from the work I do with the Health Collective, we've realized that it's a very isolating experience, because for those around you, you want to be very brave and strong. And some people are just opening up to strangers as a result, because they find that more important. It was not a theme I wanted to, I consciously put into the book. It was really funny that I think by the 6th or 7th draft, I'm like, oh, interesting. I see what's going on here, subconscious brain, because there are bits where, she talks about this trauma that hit in high school, which is where she loses her sort of stepfather or surrogate father. And there are bits much later, I will say, where I was like, oh, well, I put a beautiful thing that she remembers from her father, like showing her the stars and the constellations that may have been from real life. But I do realize that it's not something that, we need to put in a box separately. Sort of grief and loss and bereavement is something that affects all of us, or will. I'm sorry to, unfortunately, it's part of life. And it seeps into everything. So the more we learn to talk about it, the better, I think.
the subconscious of it. Mayank as well. Like, yeah.
Yeah, Mayank is, my protagonist. He loses his father when he's a young boy, actually.
In a very sort of very
Well, yeah.
sad. The crushing of you're right about that.
So there was this incident. I used to work as a reporter in Delhi, and there was this bridge collapse when they were building the metro during the Commonwealth Games, and this bridge fell down, and 5 people died, which is not, I suppose, like an extraordinary number. But I remember reporting on that and just wondering who these people were. And then, like years later, I wrote a kind of story about someone who lost their father in that accident. So Mayank, for me, yes, his father's absence weighs on him. I think he feels less less capable in some ways because he's not had that guiding force in his life in his later, in his teen years and things like that. But as my editor told me, she said something to me when I was finishing the novel. She was like, you can tell Mayank was only raised by his mother because he's so sensitive, and so
You said, yeah.
that might be true. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I didn't say it like that, but at the same time, we all have our own perspectives. The other thing is, of course, loneliness and isolation, because that's something. I mean, is it that the more we are connected, the more we are disconnected? Like you have this line that they retreated in the corner of their virtual world, like within a room, like it's almost as if one corner is becoming like this highlighted kind of space.
I think the more we read and see the research coming out, increasingly we're very hyper connected, right? Any of us can connect tomorrow or today on social media after this panel. Please do, but please buy our books first. But I think you realize that there's so many superficial connections that we spend a lot of time on because we're constantly curating our experiences like we're talking about online. We are not investing as much time in our, I would say, offline real world relationships, and you take them for granted until they're gone. And what was fascinating to me, but again, it was not a direct thing that I put in the book, but the largest or longest study that was done on happiness was done in the US on a bunch of Harvard grads that they tracked for about 70 to 80 years.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, all men at that point because it was
Happiness
only male
index,
students.
yeah.
And they found that it was not people who are winning the lottery. You always think it's going to be one big thing and you're going to be like ecstatic. It was actually the quality of their relationships that kept people happy and content, and quality of close relationships. So I think social and the way we're talking about sort of modern lives, we are having more fragmented relationships. We're not realizing, I think, until it's sort of, towards the end of the book, you sometimes don't see who's in your life and who's actually, who's there for you, right? Because you're kind of seeing everything through these filters. So that was interesting for me.
And also the other thing is, of course, image, which you have to talk about, Prayaag, once, because, the mangled image of Bharat Mata, it's something, it starts with the image, and it's like that image, in a way, it just keeps coming back. And that image is actually dealing with the conception of the way we look at Bharat Mata. I think that's something and that's your theme as well.
Absolutely. So it's a very important theme in the novel. I think, what we don't sometimes look at is the images are very powerful, right? They speak to us in many, many ways, different ways. There's all sorts of great writing. There's a writer called John Berger who writes about it the best.
Ways of seeing, yeah.
Ways of seeing, yeah. And, and so I became very curious about the kind of intentionality behind images, right? To try and break down even a painting or, anything, like why does a painter put these elements together in a certain way? Oh, sorry. Okay. Why does a painter put these elements together in a certain way? And so once I started writing this, I realized that had to be an important theme because it does speak, a photograph or an image, sadly, can do so much work that, a prose writer or, text can't. And
Yeah, no, so I was just going to say, reading your book, Prayaag, actually, it was very powerful. I also thought you were very brave because it's one of those things that, as you say, we have a visceral reaction. And I thought it was very brave of him to use this image in the way that he has and show, what went into creating it and crafting it. I feel like increasingly we're seeing people don't wait for the context. And we're quick to overreact. So I just want to say I thought it was very courageous.
I'll tell you guys a story. Actually, because I read out that bit, I actually found an image that's exactly like this. I was looking for images of Bharat Mata, and I found this painting. Someone had done a painting and put it up on their blog with two Muslim boys like throwing rocks at Bharat Mata. And it was so shocking to me because it was, the Bharat Mata itself looks so placid and calm, and she's superimposed on this map of India. And those boys, it was quite well done, the painting. And then these boys were like hurling these rocks at her, and it was so violent. There was a kind of real violence in that image, and I couldn't understand what that painter wanted to do. And so that became like a starting sort of theme for the book.
Interesting. But we have 8 minutes. One more. Can I this thing before we start?
You're the boss.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I know. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but one last thing, which is that you talk about also God, men, and spirituality. You have to talk about that.
So
why and how does it change her journey?
So in this case, we have. Oh, great, I got my phone. I think I wanted to say that for many of us, when something goes wrong, whether we, consciously think of it or not, some of us, we want to be very rational and, scientific and base everything on scientific evidence. But when things go wrong, you realize you're actually, you're praying to a higher power. You're kind of, crossing yourself 20 times. You're knocking on wood. You get a little superstitious sometimes. And for many people in India, I think spirituality, however you define it, is a core thing that you kind of brought up with. I showed some of the superstitions to her favorite aunt when she's, when she's growing up. But I feel that, in life, many of us, as we're growing up, and at some level, this is a coming of age story too. Though she's a bit older, still a millennial, but a bit older. It is about finding yourself and finding your voice. And she's really desperately searching for answers. She's desperately searching for a connect and a community. And she finds, unfortunately, not the best of God men, but she does meet someone very interesting at that ashram. And she's also echoing. What her brother has gone off to do, with a rishi who's actually a good spiritual guru who's been sort of training him over time. I just think our land, we're full of contradictions. And I think as individuals or as a country, you'll find this kind of, I'm very rational by day, and then at night I'll be like, oh wait, knock on wood 20
That's
times.
actually the core of, I think, our society, which is the rational versus the irrational, reason and unreason, I think.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Thanks so much.
And you have, before, I think we have 7 minutes, and I'm sure there are lots of questions. Last thing is, how was it writing Nisha?
Nisha, very hard. No, I mean, I actually enjoy writing female characters. I don't know why I seem to be more empathetic to them than my male. I put my male characters through all sorts of hell.
I mean, you see Nisha's photograph before you see her that way, it's almost like a prism through
Well,
which
actually, people were surprised that the second chapter suddenly jumps to her voice. They were expecting Mayank, it to be a story about Mayank.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed writing it. I had to do a lot of research into high-end chocolate, which was very nice. It's not my usual area, so it was really, I got to do some cool stuff there. I enjoyed it very much.
Questions now. Should we take the questions at 6 minutes? Yes, please. Let's get into some questions here. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Both these books seem very, very interesting. So I'm looking forward to picking them up. You alluded a little bit to this earlier, but I was wondering if you don't mind sharing what in your personal journeys really drew you to creating these characters, these specific characters.
That's a really good question. Very difficult to answer. In my personal journey, I mean, I think, well, I seem to write a lot about kind of Hindu nationalism, and I think that has something to do with how I grew up as a Muslim in Delhi. I think that definitely reflects in the book. But I think more than that, I think because there's there's a recurrent theme of mothers in my book as well. There's all sorts of mothers you encounter in the book, and in many ways we have this idealization of the mother in India, especially, and the Bharat Mata image is a perfect example of that. It's like this sanctified. The mother is sanctified and almost virginal, and it's like this. And so the book also deals with our lived experience of maternal figures and versus this idealization. And I think that I was able to do that. Once I understood that I was doing that, the book became sort of better, I think.
There's also, I think you must talk about this, because when you're talking about mother figure, how masculinity is dependent on being this whole savior mother, like the whole idea of like, you have to save the woman to be, to be a man. I think that is something which is, which you...
And honestly, we're mostly unable to protect, our mothers or anyone, And so Mayank himself, his mother goes through something that he can't protect her from. And that also shapes him. And I suppose that's, something I have also experienced. So, yeah, there are things.
I was just going to say that I'll just add to that. I think that, I was reading the latest Murakami, and in the end he quotes Borges to say that we all writers are telling the same story, but in different ways. And I feel my second novel, many, many years ago, was also about a group of friends, trying to find their way through sort of depression, drugs, death. And in this case, I think for my personal life, what I've just seen is that there's a pre and post era when there's a huge trauma. There's a way you remember things, and there's a way people see you. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now is that, that Japanese three-mask theory, where there's a public face we're showing each other right now. There's a personal face that we'll show to our family and loved ones. And there's a third mask we don't even take off for ourselves. With social media, it adds so many layers to that. And I think that's something I'm realizing, that even us sitting here, you sitting in the audience, we are constantly having to juggle what it means, to go through life in sort of a public way. But thank you for the question.
Yeah. Questions there? Yeah.
Hi, my question is for Amrita. You spoke about hyperconnected, and that is one aspect that it is something that all of us are dealing with. What would be your perspective on this whole aspect of sense of identity or belongingness in this world? And is that something that you would want to talk about in your next book?
Yes, thank you. I will take another shot at cracking that in my next book. I love that question because I think you're absolutely right. I think as I was saying, in the sort of pre-digital era, we were free to make mistakes, learn from them, grow up, learn how to be better people, and sort of evolve as we grow. And I think that's part of the human experience, surely. What started happening is we are starting to be self-censored for sure. We can see that, I think, in the political. For me, it's interesting to see in the personal as well. I might not want to share some of my opinions because someone's going to cancel me tomorrow. I'm constantly, I think, editing, self-editing that performance, and that just goes to show how fragile actually that hyper-connected world is. One thing goes wrong and everyone drops you, right? Like you're toxic, all of a sudden you're kind of... And the problem, I think, with that is when we base our identity so much on that, or rely so much on those relationships that are not real. Like, that 10,000 likes would be great to go viral, but they don't actually, they're reacting to an image. They're not reacting to a video. They're not reacting to you. I think we've conflated that. So you're absolutely right. I think that sense of identity and self-worth, if it's, constantly dependent on that, it's just a, downward spiral. But thank you. That's a lovely question.
Prayag, you have to also add to that in terms of belonging and particularly the question of identity, and censorship, because that's where...
It's actually one thing that I found amongst, I teach at a university, I teach creative writing. And one thing I found is with some of my students is that they increasingly, create spaces for themselves that are not online, a sense of themselves that is, divorced from this online world, like just completely separate from this online world. And, because it's so important for them to have something that is, not purely this kind of visible, public. It's so public, you're constantly in public. I mean, it would be, I think, horrible to go to college at this time because, you're always, there's always an eye on you. It's like, it's like an Orwellian kind of situation where there's always someone can film you. And so it's interesting that actually the people who you think are like the most kind of invested in this online world, they're the ones who are able to calibrate it more than maybe perhaps us. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do sense a resistance that I don't see amongst 40-year-olds, all of us are get up and check the Instagram feed in the morning. And, they're able to rationalize, think about it in a more systematic way, I think, sometimes.
Do you agree? Because you have younger characters. I mean, Maya is
Well, I mean, I think that the positive thing is digital natives, the younger ones, we keep hearing there is this pushback. They want more authentic content. They're not living their whole lives on social. But I will say, I mean, to your point of teaching at a university, I mean, you also meet students, and I'll just link this back to what I was sharing here is, we're so many Indias in one. So when all of these classes and the clash of, people are coming from small towns, somebody told me that they were in a university everyone was living Sonipat but dreaming LA. So they were very worried and scared their first year, the whole first year. Am I dressed the wrong way? Am I saying something that reveals that I'm not, I'm a Gawar, I'm not actually as... And so they were... And I come back to self-editing in real life. And what started happening with that is, you will have seen this. I mean, I think there's stories done on this. There's like a flatline kind of Instagram aesthetic now to everything. So if you're, somebody said somewhere that cafes globally now look the same because there's an Instagram aesthetic. So, we're doing this constantly to ourselves.
Insta-friendly cafe. That's the term right now. Insta-friendly university, for that matter, in fact. Yeah. Sorry, questions? Any other questions, please?
Questions, and I think we can... Oh, there's a question.
Hello. I just wanted to know the writing routine of all three of you. Like, how do you go about it? Do you write every day? And what's your routine for writing? That's all. And this question is all for all the three of you.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a very good question. A lot of people have come and
It's
asked.
an important question. So I write usually in the morning. So I don't teach all year round. I teach one term of the year. And So when I'm not teaching, it's I start in the morning as soon as I wake up, because it's actually the best time. I find it the most productive time, and so I'll write till maybe like 2 or 3 in the afternoon or something like that. So I try and you have to treat it like any other job. Like you have to do 8 hours a day at your desk, otherwise, or whatever, 6, 7 hours a day at your desk. Otherwise, you're not doing justice to then you're just like kind of bumming around. You're not being a writer. And so I read a lot about other writers' processes. There's some fantastic interviews in this thing called Paris Review that they do this kind of they interview authors and they all talk about process. And I noticed this amongst all my favorite authors, that they all dedicated time and they put their phones away, and there's no kind of disturbances. I still haven't reached that level of zen that I can keep like all devices away and all of that. But yeah, hopefully one day.
Yeah. I mean, I can do no phone, no Wi-Fi, but I do 3 to 4 hours on the weekends, which is why it took me 10 years, and it's taken Prayaag probably less. But I will say that I thought I'd need a sabbatical to write, and then I was reminded that actually I cannot work with blocks of free time. I need to have a job and be doing something else, and then have that weekend blocked off for writing. And like Prayaag said, it's a job. Like you have to sit in that chair. I think ideally not where you do your work from when you're working from home, but take that time, make a routine, however it works for you.
Yeah. No, I agree with Prayaag. In fact, the first morning hours are the most important hours. Your mind is fresh. You're not bogged down by the carpenter and the electrician and Amazon delivery OTPs. So I think that is something. So whoever wants to write, you have to, it's like being a doctor, I think, seeing patients or something. The diagnosis will come by the constant practice of it. So I think, yeah, writing every day is the only way out. The story will come, for sure. Thank you for the question. Yeah. And thank you, everyone. This was actually a wonderful session, I think. I really enjoyed. Yeah.
Thank you.